Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I'm putting on my sociologist hat today to guide you through a truly groundbreaking piece of legislation, the Maharashtra Women Farmers Empowerment Act 2026. For decades, our legal frameworks have operated with this massive, glaring blind spot regarding the actual people who keep our agrarian economy afloat. So we're going to unpack exactly why this law is being hailed as a national model, and what it fundamentally changes about how the state views women.
So, to really understand why this law is a big deal, we got to look at the root of the problem. The stark reality is that women form the invisible backbone of Indian farming. They make up a staggering 75% of the agricultural workforce compared to just 25% for men. Yet, if you look at our national census data, these women are almost always misclassified. They're recorded merely as laborers rather than actual cultivators. Their crucial backbreaking work, whether that's in subsistence farming, seed saving, or just daily cultivation, is entirely excluded from the GDP. And this statistical misclassification, it completely strips them of their legal standing, rendering their daily struggles completely invisible to policymakers.
But here's where it gets wild. Juxtapose that massive 75% workforce contribution with a severe ownership deficit. Despite doing the lion's share of the labor, women own a mere 12% of agricultural land. And let's be totally clear here. When women do miraculously receive land, sociological data tells us it is almost always highly fragmented, significantly less fertile, and lacking vital irrigation infrastructure. This creates a deeply entrenched land record bias because farmer identity and agricultural benefits in our present system are almost exclusively routed through recorded land titles. The vast majority of women are structurally locked out of being recognized as farmers at all.
Which brings us to a critical sociological concept you need to know: the feminization of agriculture. This refers to the increasing participation and absolutely essential role of women in agricultural production and ecology. And this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? It's being violently exacerbated by our current agrarian transition. Thanks to severe climate stress and a crisis in food security, men are migrating away from rural areas in search of wage labor. Women are the ones left behind to manage the farms. Their productive roles are increasingly critical, yet they are systematically denied their due because, in the eyes of the state, a farmer is strictly someone who holds a piece of paper, a land title.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll dive into structural exclusion. Then we'll look at the Empowerment Act of 2026 itself. After that, we'll break down the mechanics of recognition, see how it's unlocking access, and finally, do a critical evaluation. Section 1. Structural exclusion. Let's take a look at the anatomy of this marginalization.
The lived structural reality for women in rural India is defined by what sociologists call a triple burden. They don't just farm. They are forced to simultaneously manage full farm operations, fulfill community obligations, and then take on over 5 hours of daily unpaid domestic care work. We're talking fetching water, gathering fuel wood, cooking, and childcare. This incredibly heavy care burden, combined with patriarchal norms that often require male permission just to work outside the village, creates real structural immobility. It strictly anchors women to the household. It even creates an invisible intergenerational poverty trap, because mothers are frequently forced to pull their daughters out of school just to substitute for this domestic work.
And when women do step onto the farm, their experience is vastly different from the men's. There's a profound mechanization asymmetry. State mechanization drives have historically targeted traditionally male tasks, things like plowing and threshing. Conversely, heavily female tasks like transplanting and weeding paddy, which were actually intensified by the Green Revolution, have been left entirely unmechanized. This traps women in physical drudgery, leading to severe, totally undocumented occupational health crises, like chronic musculoskeletal disorders. On top of that, there's massive extension neglect. Less than 10% of agricultural extension contact hours ever reach women. Training sessions are literally timed against their domestic responsibilities. And when it comes to selling crops, physical market yards remain deeply male-dominated spaces, which forces women to rely on exploitative intermediaries.
So how is all this exhausting, unmechanized labor compensated? With severe discrimination. In informal agricultural markets, women face a massive 25 to 35% wage gap compared to men for performing the exact same labor. Even when women are the primary farm operators, male household heads routinely maintain control over the farm income. And because women lack those precious land titles we talked about, they face total institutional exclusion. They're locked out of formal credit and input subsidies, where women make up only 23% of beneficiaries. The end result? They're forced into exploitative credit traps with local moneylenders, eroding whatever tiny income they manage to generate.
This is a highly beneficial status quo for powerful stakeholders who rely heavily on this cheap, immobile labor.
Moving on to Section 2, the Empowerment Act, 2026. This is where we see a real paradigm shift.
The absolute crux of this legislation is about, quote, giving women an independent statutory identity as farmers, including those without recorded land titles. This is a huge, monumental sociological shift. For the very first time, the state is actively decoupling farmer identity from asset ownership. It's declaring that actual agricultural activity, not just holding a piece of paper for the land, is the actual grounds for recognition. It finally elevates the woman to an independent producer in her own right.
To pull this off, the Act completely redefines farming. It officially recognizes allied livelihoods like livestock rearing, dairy, poultry, and fishing. It includes pastoralism and the collection of non-timber forest produce. It includes primary processing and even those who conserve seeds and breeds. But most importantly, it explicitly includes activities undertaken without remuneration. So for the first time ever, unpaid family farm work is legally visible to the state as agricultural labor. That is huge.
So, who exactly qualifies under this brand new paradigm? The eligibility is incredibly expansive. Any woman aged 18 or above, resident in Maharashtra, and engaged as a farmer. And again, I can't stress this enough, land ownership is absolutely not required. This brings informal producers right out of the shadows, landless cultivators, agricultural laborers, and pastoralists. In a massive victory for tenant farmers, even oral leases qualify. And crucially, seasonal migrants, women who engage in agriculture in Maharashtra for at least one season a year, despite migrating within or outside the state, they can now claim the statutory identity too.
Section 3, Mechanics of Recognition. Let's talk about the Woman Farmer Certificate itself.
The process to get this certificate is designed to be highly decentralized and, thankfully, time-bound. Step 1, the woman applies to a designated officer. Step 2, the decision isn't made by some distant bureaucrat in an office building, but via a local resolution by the Gram Sabha or Nagar Panchayat, the local village or town council. Step 3, once approved, the certificate literally must be issued within 15 days. What's super fascinating from a sociological perspective is that Gram Sabhas are also empowered to recognize eligible women suo motu, meaning on their own initiative, without even waiting for an application to be filed.
Now, because localized power can sometimes lead to localized discrimination, procedural safeguards are absolutely critical here. The law mandates that any rejection requires written reasons communicated within 7 days. Furthermore, there is a robust 120-day appeal window if an application is rejected, or honestly, if the certificate simply isn't issued in time. A hearing and a reasoned order are due within 30 days of the appeal. This builds some serious accountability directly into the recognition process.
Let's look at Section 4, Unlocking Access. What kind of institutional support does this provide?
Holding this woman farmer certificate unlocks a whole suite of state entitlements. Holders gain real access to agricultural subsidies, crop insurance, and vital storage and market access. It opens doors to extension services, skills training, and credit access for state-notified schemes. And very importantly, the Act explicitly permits targeted assistance for marginalized single women. And they specifically define this to include widowed, deserted, divorced, judicially separated, and unmarried women, as well as women whose husbands are missing.
To actually make this a reality on a massive scale, the Act designs a powerful, top-down institutional architecture. There's an Empowerment Council led by the Chief Minister, which provides overall policy direction and departmental convergence. Below that, a Monitoring Committee led by the Chief Secretary tracks access and any bottlenecks. And an Empowerment Cell led by the Agriculture Secretary handles nodal implementation, coordination, and promoting gender-responsive agricultural technology. The state is also mandated to maintain a dedicated database and a state fund for women farmers to help finance these welfare programs.
Section 5, Critical Evaluation. We have to be objective and look at the limitations and risks.
So let's systematically look at the design limitations. First and foremost, we have to be clear. This provides identity, not asset rights. It doesn't alter underlying land ownership, tenancy security, or those deeply ingrained inheritance inequities. Second, support is conditional based on state schemes. Universal credit access is still not guaranteed. Third, there is no outer time limit governing when local bodies must actually make their resolutions, and a certificate can technically cease without specified due process. Finally, there are notable coverage gaps in the larger municipal corporations.
Beyond the legal design itself, there are massive implementation risks on the ground.
For instance, the risk of a documentary burden. Think about it. How does a landless or a lessee prove she farms? The required state response must be to readily accept local testimony and alternative proof. Another massive risk is fragmented acceptance, where a woman has the certificate but the local bank or crop insurer refuses to recognize it. The state must actively integrate this certificate with scheme portals, banks, and farmer registries. And of course, there is always the risk of thin funding, which requires predictable allocations and independent outcome monitoring to ensure this doesn't just remain a nice promise on paper.
So, the crucial point to take away from all this is the Maharashtra Women Farmers Empowerment Act 2026 is a genuine, monumental step forward. It is a landmark recognition and inclusion reform. It brilliantly removes land ownership as the gateway to farmer identity. However, we must be intellectually honest. It does not remove land ownership as the major determinant of control over productive resources. Success cannot just be measured by how many certificates are printed off a machine. It must be judged by whether these certificates produce usable, real-world access to assets, credit, markets, and decision-making for women.
This core tension leaves us with a profound question to ponder as we close this explainer. Does removing the gateway to legal identity create a true gateway to real economic power? Or is legal recognition merely the first, small step in a much longer battle against entrenched structural inequality in our agricultural systems? Thank you so much for joining me to explore the sociology behind this incredible legislation. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.